Welcome to this episode of the Magellan Network Show. In this episode, we're going to start a new series for the rest of the summer called The Future of Financial Advice, the future of our industry, of our profession. And the reason why I'm doing this is I've spent a lot of time this year thinking about the future. I've been doing this now for 32 and a half years, and I worry about our next gens. I worry about where we're going to get the talent and how we're going to develop the talent. So that's going to be starting our conversation today, and then we're going to carry it over the next several weeks. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Coach Joe Lucas. For 32 and a half years, I've done nothing but coach some of the most successful financial advisors in the industry. I also have the privilege of developing some of the next gen thought leaders in this industry, former clients slash students of mine. So I like to think that I've got a good pulse on where the game is today, but really more important, where the game is going. So let me start this conversation just with some numbers. Number one, 50% of all CFPs are over the age of 50. And if you look at FINRA registrations, the average age, I think last time I glanced at, was 56 average years old. Second number, 90,000 to 110,000. That's how many advisors we're going to be short by 2034. And that was a study done by McKinsey, the leading consulting firm. And then the last number I want to share with you, actually, there's two more numbers. 72% of new advisors still fail within the first 5 years. So when we say fail, I want to quantify that. Failure terms of they either leave the business or they leave the firm that brought them in the business, which is actually more economically devastating. And we'll talk about that. And then the last number is $124 trillion of assets are expected to change hands by 2048, which, that's a long time away. I get that. I understand that. But what I am saying is it still matters. Why does it still matter? Because if you're a firm of any size, I mean any size, you need to be aware of these situations. So where are we where are we as an industry? I think we're at an inflection point. I think we have an aging workforce, and data shows us that. I think we have a massive data wealth transfer coming down the pipe. In fact, some people think we're in the beginning throes of that. And then we're also going to have a new type of client, one that is going to expect high touch, but also high tech inside of that high touch. So let's talk about some things here. 26% of advisors are over 65 years old. That's by JD Powers back in 2025. That was their survey. 20% of those plan to retire within 5 years, right? Only 10% of advisors are under the age of 35. So I want you to think about that. 1/3 of all advisors will retire within the next 10 years. And that's about $6 trillion of assets that are going to be in play. And the last data that I got was in 2022, where the industry only attracted 2,579 advisors. So you can just see, and while we're having this conversation in this series, because if you're a firm owner, firm leader, this is a strategic threat to your business. And if you're a new advisor, this is the opportunity that you have inside this game. And that's why I want to spend the next couple of weeks just unpacking this. So I want you to look at it from two perspectives. If you're a W-2 advisor, and especially a younger W-2 advisor, I want to I want to build you the case why this is the greatest career. You should never quit it at all. And if you're a firm leadership, I want to make the case for you guys. Hey, we got to get off our butts and change how we approach G2 and at some point even G3 training and development. All right. So when we talked about $124 trillion of assets transferring by 2048, that was given by a report by Cerilli & Associates, again, one of our leading consultants in our industry. And you've got to look at it from a standpoint of the Gen X is going to be about $14 trillion over the next 10 years. And the millennials will be about 46 trillion over the next 25 years. But here's the key thing. Up to 90% of the heirs leave their parents' wealth managers. So So when your client, when you can, typically the woman, mom passes away, dad's already deceased, mom passed away, 90% probability that you were not going to retain those assets. Why? Lack of personal connection and outdated service model slash outdated tech. So lack of personal connection. Why? When do most advisors worry about survival? When do they worry about next gen or family next gens? At the funeral. Number one, I think it's terribly distasteful. Number two, you're playing catch up. You've already lost that game. If you're waiting till mom and or dad or at the funeral home or wherever they happen to be, and now you're going to try to build a relationship with the adult children. And by the way, adult children, let's be very clear, these people are in their 50s and 60s, not kids. Okay, they've had a whole life by themselves. And if you're not in there early in that game, then you are not in a good position. Now, I do have clients that do a really good job, much better than 10% retention, maybe 30, 40%, but it's still a big deal. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right, now let's talk about kind of where we are. So what are our clients going to want? Again, this is from data and just reports and white papers that I've put together and disseminated over the last several months. Basically, baby boomers, you know, uh, they're going to engage. So they typically engage an advisor around when they're 49 years old. Isn't that interesting? That seminal 50th birthday is when they want to start figuring out that's the average. And they're looking for a combination of technology slash digital and very much financial planning, retirement planning centric. Okay. Really, really important. Now, the millennial engages the advisor at about 29 years old. They're more interested in having somebody that shares their same values, and they're looking for something personalized, something that's transparent, right? So if you think about it, you got two different needs, two different markets, if you will, and they require different things. So the firms that win these clients are going to need a new generation of advisor, trained and equipped to meet them where they are. So if you're an owner of a firm and you want to have a 100-year firm, something that you could, maybe your children work in it and will lead it one day, or you've got your own G2s coming forward. The bottom line is this, is that you've got to be thinking about this. The old saying, what got you here is not going to get you there. What made advisory firms successful in the past will not make them successful in the future. It just doesn't, that just make sense. Well, think about it. 30 years ago, when I could think that far back, by the way, mid 90s, how did we make money in industry? We traded. We traded stocks. It was you were called a stockbroker, right? I mean, that's the way that game was played. There was no holistic planning. There was no real financial planning. Very, very little of any advisory or assets under management fee based. It was all shares, right? Dropping tickets, all that. If you played that game today, you'd starve. It's a different game today, right? We've evolved. We evolved from that to asset management, and now we evolved to financial planning and asset management, and now we're evolving into financial planning, asset management, and financial coaching and behavioral coaching. And if you're not training your advisors how to be coaches, to be your client's financial coach, you're putting yourself at risk as an organization. Okay, just the way it works. So let's talk a little bit about new advisors. Like, what do we need to do? And I work with a lot of my larger firms, my leaders, my CEOs, and we spend a lot of time talking about training and development because uh, most firms think training is licensing and products and software. And here's the reality: if you're taking on a young person in their 20s, they grew up online, they basically grew up with a mobile device, and sometimes, just sometimes, their people skills or interpersonal skills are a bit lacking. Now, why do we still? So, the good news is, I can remember when the failure rate was like 90%, 85%. So I guess over the last couple of decades, we've done a decent job, a little bit better job, right? Now it's only down to 72. Why is that? 3 out of 4 people enter this career do not survive. Why is that? Are they not good people? Are they dumb? No, it's not a talent problem. It's we have not evolved in the development side of things. Our development infrastructure still feels 20, 30 years old. Why? They still need to go ahead and acquire clients in most places. Kill what you eat, legacy compensation models, limited access to mentoring and coaching. And please don't use the word management. This is not what we're talking about here. And they also lack a structured career process. Like, hey, where am I going to be 3 years from now? Like, what's the career path? You know, younger people today, they want to know what their future looks like. They're very certainty driven. And law firms just simply don't do that. This is data. 71% of next gen advisors, so G2s, actively desire mentorship and training in financial planning and also how to be successful. Yet most firms can't deliver it. So I want you to think of it this way. So with that saying, if I put 10 G2s in a room, 3 of them are okay. 3. 7 have a gap, a mentoring, coaching, and leadership gap. 7 out of 10. And yet we wonder why our failure rate is what it is. So what's happening? Well, let's look at the industry. And this is not true in all places, but it's true in a lot of places. Major firms, wirehouses, have, really cut or eliminated a lot of their structured training programs. They're not doing what they used to do years ago, have classes of 50, 60, 70, 80 new advisors or brokers back then. It's not being done that way, right? And so there's less support for a younger advisor, more pressure put on them. And you could just see it's just a recipe for not a good outcome. And let's face it, it costs. So we'll get to some data down a little bit later, maybe this episode, next episode. But typically, if you're a firm and you have an advisor and like year 4 or 5, they either wash out or go to a competitor, that's a $600,000 to $1 million hit on your P&L between direct cost, opportunity cost, lost assets. 600,000 to a sunk cost. So what'd you think about that? Right? That's not that's real money even for this game. It's real money. Okay? So now the question becomes, what do we do about it, right? So let's talk about cost. And these are just this is some data I was able to pull, and I got this from the Society of Hiring Managers. So it's a little bit cross industry, but I think it really covers it. So replacing an advisor can cost anywhere from 150% to 250% of annual compensation. Okay, now let's look at some cost. And again, these are just swags. So, there's a big ranges here. So to go recruit the person and go get them hired, $12,000 to $24,000 cost. Onboarding for the first 6 to 12 months, $15,000 to $30,000. If they leave and you have a chair open now, there's a vacancy cost, $20,000 to $40,000. And then the senior team diverted to mentoring that replacement. So in other words, leadership is not doing their own reviews. They're not taking care of their own clients. They're handling things like that, right? So that's going to be, tens of thousands of dollars. So client attrition from a departing advisor, it's a major number. It's really, really important. So why does that matter? Because there's a hidden cost to firms. Advisor attrition is the second leading cause of asset loss at RIAs, behind only the death of the advisor. When an advisor leaves, clients often leave with them, creating compounding losses behind the direct replacement costs. Now, I know what some of you are going to say, yeah, but we have these employment agreements. They're not allowed to take clients. We have non-solicitation. We have non-competes. I get that. But in most cases, there's workarounds. I see it all the time. And it doesn't mean they're going to take 80% of the clients, but would they take 20, 30, 40% of them? Yeah. And that's a cost that your firm has to bear. And let's be very clear, if you can't develop and train next gens, you're going to lack the talent, or you have to go buy it. And it's like super, you have to go recruit it. I mean, you're going to overpay, and you're going to get somebody else's culture because you didn't develop your own culture. and that becomes very, very problematic. So we just need to be aware of that as an industry, what we're doing here and what the costs are, right, in terms of getting things done. Now, how do we handle training? Now, I've been very lucky in my career. I've collaborated with some large organizations to help put together training programs, and I can tell you, some are better than others. So I'm not sitting there. Look, I think they all have a certain level of value to it, but I want to be very clear on kind of the differentials here. Okay, so traditional training tend to be either pre-recorded modules, courses on compliance, right, CE credits, product training, broad curriculum that way. And I think what we need to remember is that that's valuable. Knowledge is valuable, so I'm not dismissing it. Okay. What new advisors also need in addition to that, is personalized situational coaching and mentoring at the moment of that challenge. So if you're a firm and you run a firm and you've got your G2s and they're going to go meet with they're going to do a review for like a C or D client, and you're not available because you're dealing with the A book, right? And they have an issue, but you're not available. You can't meet them in that moment. You just can't. The difference between content and coaching is the difference between reading a textbook on swimming or having the coach in the water beside you. That was my saying, right? So in other words, there's value in classroom, but everybody knows where it really happens is it's in the field. That's where it happens. And if you think about it, this is kind of the example I want to use, right? So so you're doing, let's say let's say you have some G2s or you're a G2 yourself. And you have your weekly team meeting, right? You do that, right? And so let's say that happens at, I don't know, let's say typical Monday morning. Now it's Monday at 5 o'clock, and you have a client calling at 5 o'clock because the market was not good today. And they're a little freaky, right? That's great, but, where's the mentoring? Where's the coaching in that moment, right? And then on Wednesday, they get a referral opportunity. Well, how should I handle that referral? What's my play there? You'll say you're in a meeting all day. Well, how does that happen? So there's a massive gap. And this is where mentoring coaching is 100 times more valuable to a young advisor than just training. The gap between a young advisor having a question and then the lead advisor being available, that's where the opportunities die because the senior advisor is not available. And that's where early career advisors lose their confidence. They make stuff up, they don't do a good job, and it becomes a big problem. And I see this all the time, in my space. I'll ask, and this has been something I've been doing the last several months. As I talk to, I got people who want to talk to me, a lot of advisors, and I reach out to organizations just out of curiosity. So when I was putting together my white paper, I really say, "Hey, what do you guys do specifically for G2 training?" And they were like, there was not a lot of good answers out there, right? They kind of, they plug into what everybody else is doing. And and there are some, there are some that do a really, I think the ensemble practice does a great job. Phil Palaviv. I've got clients who have sent their G2s. They do a great job. Uh, and and I'm always going to, again, I want to share what I think works for people. So I think, for a certain type of advisor, I think that's a really good resource, right? From that perspective. If that advisor is going to go on to be leadership at a firm, I think his program's a super program, right? But I think the key thing is, and this is where I think we get into kind of the bias. And I see, especially, so I have a bit of a specialty. I'm very good when people want to bring their kids in. So I've worked with mom or dad for, years, if not decades. And the kid that was just, starting grade school is now graduating college. That's how long I've been at this thing. And, and they're like, and I get that message like, "Hey, Johnny, Johnny, you just graduated, went to CFP studies, blah, blah, blah. And instead of having him get all messed up at a big firm where I got to untrain him, what do you think about just bringing him in day one into the firm?" And, I love family businesses. They're beautiful things when they work, and they're one of the most miserable things when they don't work. And so I think what a lot of times happen is advisors will say to themselves, and somebody even out loud, well, this is how I got started. So that's how you're going to get started. And I remember this vividly not too long ago. I had a client of mine, good client of mine, very long term client, and we go, hey, so and so is going to join the team. I said, great. I go, so what's the game plan? He goes, well, I'm going to do, he's going to start like I started. So, well, what does that mean? He says he's going to cold call. I said, so you want him out of the business in 30 to 45 days? You really want him in and out that quick? And this is during a Zoom, and my client's looking at me like, what are you talking about? I said, look, man, they're not wired like you and I. They're just not. you know? And I'm gonna say this, and hopefully it doesn't offend anybody. My generation, so I'll be 62 this year. Been doing this for 32 years. I grew up having to make it or not. You won or you didn't. There was no such thing as a participation trophy. There were winners and there were losers, and there was a lot of rejection, a lot of pain. And I know, maybe I'm peeling my onion back here a little bit too much for everybody, but hear me out. My wife and I did a lot to keep our kids insulated from that pain. They were competitive. They were competitive athletes, and I think that's what kind of helped because there was winners. There was trophies and there was no trophies sometimes. But I think a lot of that generation, and I again excuse the language, I call them the marshmallow generation. They're a little soft, and so if you're going to think about it this way: you have an athlete that you're going to bring on your team, but they've not been trained the way they need to be trained. They don't have the same psychology, and you're going to put them in a position that's going to require a certain type of psychology that they currently do not possess. And for some of you who are on the other side of that conversation, where you went to college or you're in college right now, and by the way, let me say this before we get too far because I want to wrap this episode up. Being an advisor, I would wish every young person get in this game. It is what we do is meaningful work. It pays really well. You have impact. But if you're in the wrong organization, the wrong culture where it's heavy sales oriented and you got to make numbers or you're gone, let me just say this to you right now. I hear you and I get it. Just because you may not be succeeding in the organization that you're in does not mean that you can succeed in somebody else's organization. So I just want to make this, I guess it was this almost plea to you. If you're a G2 listening or watching and you're not happy and you're struggling. It's like an athlete. If I put you on the wrong team in the wrong position, I don't care how good of an athlete you are, you're going to struggle and fail. So I will submit to you that find the right team, find the right position, don't quit the game. You went through a lot to school to get educated. Maybe you already have your CFP and you're just not in the right culture. You're not with the right leader. There's plenty of places to go. And I'm not a recruiter, but if you need help, reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can message me or leave a message here on my YouTube channel or just reach out, period. I would love to be a resource. Again, I'm not a recruiter. And let me say this for the leaders out there. Just because you pay somebody really well does not mean that so the other bias we have is, well, I pay well, then the capability should be there. No, capabilities have got to be developed. And capabilities have nothing to do with compensation. You can pay somebody really well and they're not capable. Well, I'm paying them well, they should be capable. It doesn't work that way. Or they should figure out how to be capable. It doesn't work that way. If they can figure out how to do that on their own, they have their own shop. Right? They just would. So just keep that in mind, okay? When you're bringing on a young person, a G2, I believe you have a moral and ethical duty and responsibility for this industry and for yourself to train, mentor, coach, not just train. All right. So that's what I got for you guys this week. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Magellan Network Show. Make sure you subscribe to our channels, YouTube, podcast. Like this episode. Leave a comment and a review that really helps us on these platforms. Forward this episode to a colleague in the game if you find it valuable, and I will see everybody again in 7 days.